says, God is able of these stones to raise up children to Abraham. So this idea that seminal lineage gains favor with God is a farce. It's not true. Now, did Israel, they were exposed to all those things, and they had all those things, but if they did not walk in faith with those things, they did not benefit them. Does that make sense? It benefited them in the sense that they were all going to eat manna and still follow around for 39 years, follow around a pillar of fire at night and then a shroud of mist during the day. They had all that, but they weren't truly Israelites, not in the sense of God's calling and what God wanted for them, which was a nation to possess his presence and then give that to other people, right? So he's making now, this is kind of a twofold statement. He's going to make it in a seminal way, meaning, the word that he uses there is sperma. So the idea is someone who is the literal physical relative of another. That not everybody who was a descendant of Abraham was his sperma, but he's also going to use a second word here where he says that not everybody born of Abraham is their teknon, which would be born of. It's over and over again in the Greek where you see children, a lot of times it's born of God or born of so-and-so, somebody who is truly their child, if that makes sense. So he's going to launch into that now. He says, for not all who are descended from Israel belong to Israel. And not all are children, and this is teknon, not all are born of Abraham because they are his sperma, offspring. So what he's saying literally is, not every single child who was born to Abraham was actually a born one of Abraham. Clear as mud, right? The idea is not every child that was from him, his sperma, was actually considered to be born of Abraham for the sake of the promise. And he's going to go on. He says, but through Isaac shall your sperma be named. So Isaac was the offspring by which the lineage of Jesus would be physically. This means that it is not the teknon, the born ones of the flesh, who are the teknon of God. But the teknon of the promise, the children of the promise, the born ones of the promise, are counted as the sperma. So what he's saying is, it's the people that are based on promise. There's two ways that this is true. The people that are of promise, in that who receive the promises that God have for them of righteousness, which is by faith, those are true children of God and true Israelis. And there's also here an exclusion because he's about to talk about this is a preamble to God's sovereignty and who he chose out of Abraham's children. Does that make sense? So he's preparing us for the fact that God did make sovereign choices. So he goes on, he says in verse 9, for this is what the promise said. About this time next year, I will return and Sarah shall have a son. And not only so, but also when Rebekah conceived children by one man, our forefather Isaac. What he's saying is that God sovereignly chose a lineage for Israel. He chose a spiritual lineage for all believers of all time, Israeli believers. When I say Israeli believers, I'm not talking about Christians who used to be Jews. I'm talking about Jews that actually walked with God by faith. Because it was always known, it was taught, that when you sacrificed an animal, that blood, the blood of bulls and goats, it never could forgive sin. It could not. They all knew that. The word that was used was blotted. It blotted out sin. Literally, the blood smeared over sin. But when you read of Jesus returning in the prophecies of Messiah, he does away with sin. The most common usage is he bears our iniquity, our avon, that he himself bears it, carries it. In other words, he took the consequences of our crooked ways that smash us down. That's the imagery of the Old Testament. So every Jew who was a true Jew out of a seminal sense, and meaning not just by descent or race, was declared a true Jew by God and God alone between them, based on the fact that they had faith that, yes, they practiced this law now and these sacrifices and the red heifer and the whole 9 yards, the sprinkling of the blood, the Day of Atonement, all of those things, but that they pointed to the Messiah that would come. And his blood didn't smear sin, it didn't smear blood over sin, it forgave it and bore it away. Does that make sense? So every true Jew, that's how they walked.